And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's fashion, Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And now, here's Ted.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If it's your first time, we hope you enjoy the program. If you're a regular, I hope you will continue to enjoy the program, and invite all your guests, your friends, neighbors, and even people who owe you money. It doesn't really matter to me. Just bring people out, would you? Thank you. You know, my next guest, during her amazing 47-year career as a journalist, Rita DeMontis has interviewed some of the most celebrated fashion designers, chefs, and restaurateurs right across the world, including such luminaries as Jamie Oliver, Julia Child, Anthony Bourdain, and Guy Fieri, and that's just to name a few. She was also the winner of the prestigious 2018 Media and Publishing Award from the Ontario Hostelry Institute. Her columns have been read right across North America, and in fact, in parts right across the entire globe. Recently, she announced she was stepping down from her position as National Lifestyle and Food Editor for Sun Media. Hello, Rita DeMontis. So congratulations to you, and that's kind of a strange thing to say when you congratulate someone. Congratulations for stopping work, but you're not stopping at all, are you? You're
No,
just
not
stopping.
really.
You're no longer going to be the National Lifestyle and Food Editor for Sun Media.
Exactly. Yeah.
But your name and your face and your words will probably still show up in some of their papers every once in a while, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I still have, I'll be doing some stories for them. A lot of them will be food related, some travel pieces. I'm going to Dubai. For a food
Very
trip.
nice.
Yeah,
Very
I'm
nice.
excited about that. Yeah.
No, I can't. I mean, I've known you for a long time, and I can't believe that you've been at the Sun for 47 years. Is that right?
47 years this year. Yeah.
Wow.
That's, and I started in August. I was 21 years old. And before
Wow.
that, I worked for TV Guide magazine for two years and a bit. So I'm in media for 50 years.
Wow. So did you grow up in Toronto?
Yeah. Oh, yes. So I was born in France to Sardinian parents, and when I was two and a half,
Wow.
my parents immigrated to Toronto, and we lived downtown. I lived on Davenport Road near Christie, and I went to McMurk Public School, which was probably one of the best schools growing up. We were in swim classes from junior kindergarten on, and what they emphasized from grade 1, 2, and 3 before we left was math and grammar. Like they were big grammar people, and I was talking sentence structure, syntax, spelling at an early age. And then we moved to Jane and Shepherd when I was in grade 3, in March of grade 3. That was after that whole debacle with the Kennedy assassination. You remember, Ted, we were like lying underneath our desks thinking when the bomb went off, we'd be protected. Our school actually had 2 bomb shelters. And
Wow.
I remember the day the principal came in and announced that Kennedy, the president of the United States, had been assassinated. I didn't know what the word assassinated meant, but we all had to go home early. And then a few days later, live on TV, the biggest reality show, we saw Lee Harvey Oswald
Yeah.
assassinated. And
Yeah.
here's the thing, Ted, standing right next to Lee Harvey Oswald, none other than the very famous Peter Worthington, who,
Right.
yeah, his Oswald's blood splattered on Peter's white shirt.
Really.
And I'm a little girl in grade 3, and I would grow up to be mentored by this giant of the industry.
And he was a giant of the industry.
Oh my goodness, he was the kindest man, but he was a very humble man. And being Italian, we have to feed people or we don't get into heaven. So they would make him, these tiny little the women would cluck all over him in the office and dote on him because we loved him and adored him, and he was getting older and frail. And I remember my girlfriend would make him these egg salad sandwiches with the crust removed, cut in 4. So I was like, "That's not a sandwich, Peter. What are you eating?" And I remember going, Messina Bakery, I think, and I made, I ordered the big honkers, veal,
Uh-huh.
mushrooms, peppers, and I'd bring it in. And I said, "Now that's a sandwich. You better eat
Yeah.
all that sucker." And he
Yeah.
would.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's how I started. Yeah. And then I went to Calico Drive, and then Oakdale Junior High, and then Westview Centennial, Jane and Finch, and I graduated.
And how did you get into the newspaper business?
Well, when I was at Westview, I figured I had, I was into poetry, writing, existentialism, the old hippie era. And I realized I was graduating into unemployment because there was no such thing as trying to go to university because we all had to help our families. But there was this tiny little sign in the principal's office, and they were looking for an assistant editor for TV Guide magazine, which I was like, oh, that can't be true because when I was a kid, I used to collect TV Guide magazine covers. So I
Hmm.
applied. I phoned. I applied. I got the job because I found a grammar mistake in their standard test that they gave everyone. So they hired me. And I graduated grade 12 on Friday afternoon. And on Monday, I went to work for TV Guide magazine. And
Wow.
then after 2.5 years, I tried to be a travel agent for about 2 months. A disaster. They couldn't wait to get rid of me. I couldn't wait to leave. And I started bugging people, bugging and bugging. And I started phoning this. I always knew when the sun came out in 71 that I was going to join them. I was going to join this crazy circus. And through a happy series of circumstances, my luck, the editor of the day, Jim McPherson, his two staff members quit on him. So he had, after telling me off on a Thursday, he phones me on Friday and says, "Are you sure you know this job?" And I said, "Mr. McPherson, you'll be surprised to know I'll probably know it better than you," which didn't really, I
Yeah.
wasn't being cocky. I was always very honest. And sure enough, I started at the Sun doing the TV magazine. And then I grew and evolved, and I worked with a group of unbelievable, like these were the wild, wild west of journalism people.
Yeah.
If a story needed to be told, they'd send you. They had such amazing faith in you. And from there, I started doing radio, as you know, and I just learned to listen very carefully to instructions, to ask the right questions. And I would sit next to Bob McDonald, who was, oh my goodness, Bob taught me to always ask the questions until it got boring, and then ask the last question. And I got to interview the most amazing people. Like I had a woman. There was a book called Life with Billy came out in the late 70s, and it was about a woman from Nova Scotia who murdered her husband because he had violated her and brutally beaten her, and the worst case of domestic violence in Canada at the time. And he was threatening to kill her son, and she had no recourse but to kill him, or else he was going to kill them all. So it became a cause célèbre for domestic violence at that time.
Hmm.
And there was a book written by it. Brian Valley, who was one of Canada's iconic writers and documentary filmmakers and everything, he was a friend of my boss, Les Payette. And Brian had written this book, did the documentary. And here's the weird thing: when he did the documentary and they interviewed this woman, they kept getting this really weird sound coming out of the sound system. So they would stop the interview. She was giving a very soft voice, very matter of fact, but they couldn't understand where this noise came from. It finally dawned on them. It was her heart. Every time she had to talk about what had happened to her, her heart almost came through the mic. Anyways, she was on
Wow.
a talking tour. And when it came to my turn, I was the last one of the day. She was exhausted. She came from a small town. She had gone to prison. She was found guilty, not guilty, guilty. She had been through the ringer. So I said, I understand. I understand. She doesn't want to talk. Totally respectful of that. But tell her to come. I have milk and cookies. She can put her feet up, wait for her flight home, and I will give her a safe harbor just to, you know, just to veg. And sure enough, she came, and we talked about everything. We talked about flowers. We talked about her garden. We talked about this. We talked about that. I warmed up the cookies. She had milk and cookies. And then I stood up and I said, "It's time for you to leave because I know you're tired." And that's when and I knew it was coming though, not a stupid person. And she says, "I need to tell you something I haven't told anyone. And I sat down and I nodded and I said, "And what would that be?" And she says, "I don't believe my husband is dead. So I'm going with my lawyer to the coroner's office so I can view pictures of him with his head shot off so that I can sleep tonight knowing that he is out of my life." And that was my story.
Wow.
And from then on, and these were my bosses. They gave me carte blanche. They taught me well. It was amazing, just amazing. And every day there was an adventure. There was lions and tigers and bears. There were dancers. Crazy
Yeah, I mean,
people would come in.
that story alone is worth you getting the title of a lifestyle editor.
I think that's very, very kind. I've been very humbled by all this. Like the experience has been like I'm overwhelmed by all the accolades on. Like I have a lot of friends, and I'm very blessed.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, everyone has a good story, and I've been blessed to write those stories.
Well,
So
I believe that everybody has a story, at least. I mean, I'm one of those people that truly believe that if you walked into a mall, your local neighborhood mall, and just picked 10 people at random and sat down with each of them for 10 minutes, that by the time you finished a conversation with every one of those 10 people, everyone would have at least one really interesting story. Because
they would.
even if you're not a fascinating person to begin with, or don't live a fascinating lifestyle, stuff happens. Stuff
Absolutely.
happens, right?
Absolutely. I remember I
Yeah.
was in Cloverdale Mall once and I was sitting on one of the benches and there was a lady sitting next to me and she was absolutely delightful. And you could tell she was elderly and she was chatty and I was listening to her story. She was in her 90s and she told me, I come here every day, I walk the mall. And I said, "That's fabulous." And then she told me who she was. She was she was Ukrainian. She had gone through the wars. She had lost people, but she had always had great faith, and her faith showed her all this. And I was fascinated, and I thought she had given me a gift that day. And then, we talked for like over an hour, and then I got up and I said, "I have to leave now. Can I hug you?" And she goes, "I would love to hug you. I won't see you again, but thank you for listening to my story." And I walked out of there. I was emotional because we have nothing to complain about. When you
Yeah.
think of what many people have gone through in history, and this woman in her 90s who faces every day by herself and makes her way down to Cloverdale and walks the length and width and smiles at people when in her heart she carries so much tragedy. And she
Yeah.
had shared it with me.
Yeah. That is fascinating. Um, I want to talk to you about so many different things that you've done over the years, but I want to go back to when the son was first formed, when you first came on board. Um, it was a man's world,
Big
to
time.
say the least.
Oh, yeah.
And we see the kind of sexism that exists today, and we saw it without getting into detail, but here in Toronto, regarding a television reporter and everything that she had gone through on television and in radio, and that's in modern times. That's within the last 10 years. I'm thinking like 40 years ago. I mean, did you feel like a third class, never mind a second class citizen at times?
Um, yes, I had to learn how to. It was an intimidating environment. You had to learn to. I have an analogy. It's rude. I don't really care. You had to piss in the corners with the big dogs,
Yeah.
and that was your voice. And I, like what transpired. Was it right? Of course not. But you had to pick your battles, and I had a vision of what was important to me for my work and what I could bring to the sun, and you just plowed through.
Hmm.
It was a very testosterone driven environment and in the industry. And I was lucky because I was like everybody's baby sister. And they
Hmm.
were really, I would find the guys would be very respectful with me. And I would never, but there's like any industry, you have to, like I said, you have to get, you have to pick your battles, and you either win some. There are days when you would lose everything, and there are days when you would just take it all home. So,
What were your thoughts when the Sunshine Girl was born? I mean, it wasn't the idea. It wasn't an
well, the
original
Sunshine Girl
idea
was
from
there
the
when I
sun.
was there.
Pardon me?
Um, the Sunshine, when I started at the Sun, the Sunshine Girl was huge.
Yeah, yeah, and it still exists. She still exists. The
Oh yeah,
concept still
yeah,
exists.
yeah. How did I feel about it? I guess it was a time of year. My sister was a sunshine girl. I
Hmm.
encouraged her. She looked because it was. Did I know any better? Not at that time. I was pretty ingenue. But it was also I would look at some like one of the biggest artists who shot Sunshine Girls and Boys was Sylvia Pagoda, and she used to
Yeah.
take people and make them look amazing. They were not tawdry; it was artwork. So I would view things in terms of how would an artist look at this. Uh, I'm sure that is not a popular opinion, but it was I would be looking at it. I would listen to the photographers because it wasn't just the Sunshine Girls they were shooting. I would just watch how they shot things. I was really
Yeah.
mesmerized by how they went out because a picture is worth 1,000 words, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
So during the course of your years, you've written about many things in terms of lifestyle. I mean, fashion. You did a piece that maybe we'll have a chance to talk about an article on National Near Miss Day.
National
But
Near
I
Miss
think,
Day.
but I think most people, at least I speak for myself, when I think of you and your writing, I think of your connection with food
Yeah.
and your passion for food and the amount of times I had to use a napkin to read your column because I was drooling all over it. Uh, because your illustrations, your verbal illustrations were so good and were so accurate. I mean, you're coming from an Italian background. Italians are known for their passion for food.
Oh
Is
yeah.
is that always been a passion for you?
Yes, it has, and it's because my mother was a professional cook,
Ah.
and I learned to understand and appreciate the ingredients. One of the things, the old adage that Italian cuisine is very simple, but it's very complex. It
Hmm.
does, it rings true. We would be, you'd have a handful of ingredients, you can create a feast. And that's what I was brought up with. And then I'd go to work and I would always be curious and go, I wonder what if I made cakes or if I did this. So every day I would be bringing, like, I once made something called um, bread salad. And all it was that I had fresh tomatoes from my father-in-law's garden. They were amazing, and they were warm from the sun. And I chopped them all up. I took stale bread and I cubed it, and then I tossed it all, and I added red onion, a clove of garlic, which I removed at the end, fresh basil and fresh oregano, salt and pepper, and red wine vinegar, and
Mm.
olive oil. And then I let that sit, and I bring it into the office, and I said, "Have some bread salad." They said, "What is it?" I said, "It's tomatoes and bread." Wow, people, their brains exploded because of the flavor of the red wine vinegar and olive oil and salt and pepper and these fresh tomatoes on bread, and you can just eat the whole bowl.
Yeah.
And it was nothing. It was just
Yeah.
nothing. I get when I watch some of the stuff on TV and all this stuff they add, and it's like
Uh,
you're killing. Well, you're taking the core of what this meal is and you're burying it, so the
yeah.
real flavor doesn't come through.
I'm curious as to why you refer to your mom as a professional cook and not a chef.
Well, because she didn't go to chef school. So technically, she was a chef. So she worked for catering companies. She worked for chefs, but she didn't have like her red seal or her a diploma in it. So she was brought up as a child in a household full of really dynamic cooks. So
Hmm.
I call myself a professional cook, not a
No.
chef,
Okay. Okay.
and I'm a good cook. Let me tell you.
Yes, I don't doubt that for one
It's not
second.
an ego thing. My
I know it
sisters,
isn't.
now they're like they have chef quality. Like you wouldn't believe this stuff. And one of my sisters is like, Martha Stewart, move over, man, and she goes into great detail on her ingredients, and she explains what each. My other sister, the same thing. And we grew up um, on offal foods. We grew up on pig's feet. I had lamb's head. I had calves brain when we were kids, and snails, and they were all delicious because it was
Hmm.
cheap food.
Hmm.
I'm really respectful of the quality of the meats that I buy and consume. I'm mostly vegetarian, but you know why? Because when I was a kid, I watched my uncle and my father butcher several pigs, butcher
Hmm.
pigeons, and butcher chickens. and you're there and you see and you smell and you hear. And that makes you very, very respectful of the meals in front of you instead of those nice little packages you get in the stores. So because of that, I really, you honor the meats that you eat or whatever, and that's how I apply everything respectful to the foods I put on the table.
We've witnessed uh, quite an interesting change, a positive change in terms of the way we look at food nowadays.
Yes.
We're probably more well these days. I mean, I'm talking recently. The cost of food is
Ugh,
just gone completely haywire. But
yeah.
there's a concern even moreover than just the cost. Of wasting food, like and you talk to most people feel bad about taking a plate of food and eating half of it and throwing the rest in the garbage. You feel like I should be doing something with this. I shouldn't be just getting rid of it when there's so many people out there who have nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done many, many stories on food waste. The tonnage of food being
Yeah,
thrown out is criminal. It's criminal. We really have to pay attention to best before dates. We really have to pay attention to not being, like if you're going to buy all this stuff, you better make sure you finish it at the end of the week. You're filling up our landfill, and there
yeah,
are people like there's such a juxtapositioning of from the ridiculous amount of like you go to some Italian weddings and it's like who's going to eat all this stuff to kids who are going to school hungry? To
yeah.
me, hunger is a crime. It really is.
Do you not think that the restaurants are to blame in many cases where the portions we got to a point where the portions were ridiculously stupid, and the
They
older
were.
you get, the less you can consume. Like I can't eat an entire steak
No.
by myself as I
Do
did
you
when I
take it
was in my
home?
30s.
Do you pack it home now?
Yeah, yeah,
So do I. See, that's
for
really
sure.
good. Before it used to be frowned on, doggy bags they were called, and people were they look down at you. No, not anymore. Every little thing comes home with me,
Yeah,
and it's consumed. And I notice now that food, before everything was ginormous, and I think it was to show that we were in a healthy environment that we can feed you all this. I think it's more so in the U.S. to be honest with you.
yeah, it is.
Here, I think we're being a little bit more respectful, and the food and the stuff is shrinking. It's not as huge. It's
Well,
still
it is now because of the costs, but we got to a point where there's so much, and as to your thinking of, can you take this home? Yeah, whenever I can. But if they load a huge pile of French fries on me, French fries don't carry overnight.
no, no,
They're
not
just
at all.
they're not you're not gonna eat them the next day, and many salads, once you've poured the dressing or on the salad, the same thing is true there as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
don't give me as many fries, don't give me as much salad, but then other people are gonna complain and say, "Well, that's all? That's all?" And they're the ones who need canes to stand up, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's
There's not.
you've met some of the greatest chefs in the world, and that is not an exaggeration at all. Let's talk about some of the people you've met. Let's talk about, first of all, one of your close friends is Jamie Oliver.
Yes, Jamie Oliver and I have become pretty good friends.
Yeah.
I've interviewed him many, many, many times since the first time I met him in 2001, which was February the 16th. I flew down to New York City. He was coming off that whole naked chef
Hmm.
persona. He was a young, angry man because he wanted to take control of his identity and his brand. And everybody was, he was so popular, and everybody wanted a piece of Jamie Oliver. And I met him, and that was his messaging to me. Isn't that, the whole idea of the naked chef? He was struggling with that naked chef thing. It wasn't about him being naked. He was a good-looking guy, let me tell you. But it was the
Yeah.
fact that the food was stripped down to the basics. And then we just sort of like hit it off. And every time I met him, he would stop. He'd come over. He'd give me a hug. He was so kind, such a class act,
Yeah.
really personable. A father, like you got to watch some of his videos. His son Buddy, I think, is now really coming up. He's going to be the next naked chef. But I spent 3 days in as a guest of Jamie Oliver and his business associates and his family, so to speak. And when he promoted his latest cookbook, and we were on some hilltop in Tuscany, It was gorgeous, and it was in a vineyard in a very famous place, and he cooked for us. I remember sitting in the backyard, which it's not like anybody's backyard, there's rolling
No, no.
and there was a fire pit, and you know what I talked about? Canadian food. I talked about like the Beretta family and their story and how they created, their company, and I talked about, the different like our chefs and how they're head and shoulders above the world as far as I'm concerned. And he listened intently. He asked questions. That's what I found so profound about Jamie Oliver. It's not about him. He wants to hear your story, and he loved to hear what I was telling him about our chefs here in Canada. Like,
Hmm.
you have Chef Brad Long. You know Brad Long?
I
He is.
not personally, but I know what you're talking
I've
about.
known him for years, and I read him when he was the executive chef at the ACC. He wrote a book on butter. This book is an award-winning book. You embrace the butter because he does his research, and it's just amazing. And if you meet him, he is all about farm to table. He's just his messaging is so pure. So I talked about people like him and Christine Cushing.
Yeah,
Emily Richards is one of my favorite. Elizabeth Baird. Elizabeth Baird is our own Julia Child, and
yeah.
she is she's a legend in the culinary Canadian landscape. So
Hmm.
here are these people who I talk to like I'm just like, wow, I can't believe you're my friend,
You met Julia Child. You interviewed Julia
No,
Child.
I interviewed Julia Child on the phone, but I never got a chance
Hmm.
to meet her. And she was
Hmm.
quite frail towards the end,
Hmm.
but she was very, very like I followed her, and she is the face of modern cuisine in North America as we know it, French cuisine, classic French cuisine.
All right.
But I did interview Paul Bocuse from Bocuse d'Or Awards.
Hmm.
He was very, very frail when I met him.
Anthony
I
Bourdain.
Anthony Bourdain, I interviewed him about 12 times. My connection with Anthony Bourdain is quite fascinating because his second wife is Sardinian. I'm Sardinian. I asked him, like, and that's when I found he was the happiest. He was talking about his life. He had just become a dad. He talked to me about his daughter. He had a little charcuterie board in front of him. We met at his publisher's offices. I think they were in the Yonge and Bloor area. I had already met him many times before, and depending on what mood he was in, I was either a straight interview or he was very personable or very angry or very, and I totally get it because one thing about Anthony Bourdain is he knew he was an open book. So he was fearless that you can ask him anything. The most difficult question I asked Anthony Bourdain was, would he eat dog? And he was really pained by that. And he tried to give me an honest answer. And he said, if it was a poor farmer who spent a month of his pay to make a meal for me, and that meal was a little dog, he would eat it. But then he was very, very, very tortured by that. But anyways, his second wife, Ottavia, is from Nuoro, which is where my relatives are. Nuoro is the size of my office, basically. And I looked
Hmm.
at him and I said, could there be an obscure possibility that we are now related? Because your wife is from Nuoro, where my relatives are from. And Nuoro is a very small town. Anyways, we had a good laugh over that. And he talked about the Sardinian cuisine, and I was fascinated that he knew all about the panicarizal, which is the famous bread that we have, and the offal offerings, and just the whole the cheeses that Sardinians create are like mind-boggling. I'll have to tell you where to get them, Ted, or I will bring them to you personally because I know a place, International Cheese, that you can buy Sardinian cheese there. But that's my relationship. And then I flew down to New York City to interview him in October, and I remember I looked at him, and he looked so tired, and he had been working out. His arms are like cords. And I looked at him and I said, how are you doing all this? Where do you find the time? And he looked startled and he says, time? I don't know. I don't know where I'm getting the time. And I realized he was just, and then I said to him, do you remember you did that series and Iggy Pop was in the episode? And he said, you remember? I said, oh my goodness. And I started quoting to him what Iggy Pop had said to him in the episode of I forgot the series. It was the CNN series, and I said, Iggy Pop turned to you and said, "You strike me I'm a curious man. You strike me as a curious man too." And he smiled, and Anthony Bourdain smiled and said, "Do you remember that?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "I got chills. This man was very profound to me, Iggy Pop."
Hmm.
And that I remembered that for him. And then we talked about his love of music, and I just stuck. I was not interested in knowing any tawdry details. I was there to talk about why he was there, his work, his
Right.
cookbooks, and everything like that. And then he died 6 months after that.
What made him such a troubled person? Do you know? Do you think? You think you know?
I think he was a very shy man, and I think fame. He was at the right place at the right time when it came to fame, because people, they create something and then they want a piece of it. And he really he had. I think Anthony Bourdain always he was a very profound person. He was very three-dimensional, and he was always very curious. But I think he was also very he had a lot of grief, and I think he was just like one of these like Vincent Van Gogh type of guys,
Hmm.
where you're always trying to find the answers to your happiness when the happiness is right in front of you, but you
Yeah.
feel you don't deserve it.
Do you think maybe the fact that he became so popular um, was a difficult thing for him to handle because he was shy and it's like, oh, I think I've over succeeded my boundaries.
I think so, because I remember he was in town once and I interviewed him, and he was kind of angry, and he said, I want to leave and go live in Vietnam, or I think it was Vietnam at the time. I want to go live in a small village, and I want to just be obscure, and just, this is what makes me happy. He was a brilliant writer. I mean, the man had a way with
Hmm.
words,
Hmm.
and he was very gifted. And sometimes, the gifts come with a great price.
Ted Wallachin returns in a moment.
Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1 866 309 0387. That's 1 866 309 0387. Or you can get her at info at etpcanada.ca. That's info at etpcanada.ca. Do you have an upcoming wedding on your calendar? Hey, it's Ted Wallachin for Tom's Place. If you're the father of the bride or a special guest who needs an elegant new suit or tuxedo, Tom will help you get ready for the spotlight. And if you're the lucky groom, Tom is a friend of the groom and the best man to help you dress the entire wedding party for your special day. Whether it's formal or informal, destination wedding, traditional or contemporary, tailored suits, or classic tuxedos with all the accessories, why rent a tux when it's so affordable to buy a classic that'll take you to events for years to come? Find out more at Tom's Place in Kensington Market. No one can dress you better or save you more than our wedding specialists. And don't forget, enter our wonderful wedding contest at toms-place.com to win a $500 credit for your wedding party outfits. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Have you met Guy Fieri?
Yes, yes, I love Guy Fieri.
He didn't like Guy Fieri.
No, he
Anthony
was,
Bourdain.
yeah, and he didn't like Rachel Ray.
Mm-hmm.
He had this, and I don't know if people do that to get reaction,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Guy Fieri, I interviewed him. He is so profound.
Mm-hmm.
What people don't realize is he gives back so much behind the
Well,
scenes. He takes
during
care
the
of so much.
pandemic, when he started that whole cause to raise money to give like $500 checks to restaurant workers who had been laid off because the restaurants had been closed, and I don't know what the exact amount was, but I think it's something like 20 or 30 million dollars that he raised.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
that's stunning.
It's amazing, and he did it, and he doesn't. He wasn't interested in accolades or things like that. He's actually a very astute businessman, and
Well, no kidding,
yeah,
no kidding.
he's
Yeah.
actually probably the top five. People don't realize that he's got a shtick. Everybody has a shtick, right? You want to be
Mhm.
noticed, but behind all that, this is a very, very serious chef.
I had an opportunity to meet him when he was in Toronto at one of these charity functions where they had all the different chefs. You were probably there for
Yeah,
it. I can't remember what it was called, or what the charity was, but it was at the Royal York Hotel, if I recall. And I was doing a broadcast there, and I got a chance to chat with him for about 10 minutes or so on air, and then about another 5 minutes or so actually off air, for which my daughter almost took my head off, and she said, "You didn't tell me you were going to meet him." I said, "I didn't know you cared." Oh, she's still pissed at me today, and that's like 15 years ago. But he said something interesting to me. He said, he says, the time that I've spent here in your city of Toronto, he says, you guys should put together an advertising campaign based just on the restaurants that you've got, because you've got some of the greatest restaurants in the world, and put those commercials on all the all the cities bordering Toronto, because people should be coming up here to eat.
they should be. They really should be coming up here because we have the most incredible talent. And I think it's because Canadians are pretty humble people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite chefs is Chef John Higgins from George
Yeah.
Foreman.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. What a wonderful man.
And an amazing teacher, just so
Hmm.
profound. I remember when he was at the King Eddie, I was invited to the chef's table there, and I remember to this day this bon mot he had created, which was basically a layer of avocado. This is years and years ago, avocado and shrimp, and this like you just threw it in your mouth and it exploded with this unbelievable flavor. And the plate it came on, it was a bottle that had been flattened, and then they gave you the bottle to take home. I said, "Can I have three more of these little things?" Because they were like, and he was so humble,
Uh,
unbelievable, kind man.
It's hard to answer the question, and I'm not going to ask you what's the one meal if you could only choose one meal, what would it be? Because I think that's unfair. But if there's two or three different kinds of meals, what are the kinds of things that really excite you when you're thinking, okay, I'm going to this restaurant, or I'm going to have this meal or this kind of fare?
To be honest with you, it sounds really stupid. I remember years and years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of the chef. He's very famous in Canada. He's an Italian guy. He made a bowl of risotto,
I love
simple
risotto.
risotto, small little bowl, and it had the right balance of butter and cheese. But on top, he had a seared little tidbit of foie gras.
Wow.
I dream of this bowl to this day. I dream of this, and then I dream when I was 27 and I traveled through Italy with my sister. We ended up in Como, where I had the most purest vanilla ice cream, and it was made with risotto. It was made with rice.
Hmm.
We're talking, I was 27, you figure I'll be 68. I still remember this ice cream. I have searched the planet for it. It was almost like a spiritual experience because it was the
Hmm.
right balance. It was the purest vanilla. It had a custard base and these little kernels of risotto that made you weep with joy.
Do you ever think that sometimes we look back and we think, boy, because I talk to people, there's a small burger chain in Toronto. I'm not going to mention the name because it's not fair to them, but people tell me, they say, "Oh yeah, I remember we used to go to went to this there's one in Etobicoke. I went to Etobicoke Collegiate. We used to, Friday nights we go to a party and everybody get drunk, and then we go at 2 o'clock in the morning. We go to this place and have these burgers, the best burgers in the world." And I went there. It was garbage.
Huh.
What we think tasted really good 30, 40, and I'm not disputing what you're saying about the vanilla, the ice cream, I should say. But do you know what I'm saying? Sometimes we think back and we think, boy, was that ever good.
Yeah. Your taste buds change too, huh?
Well, I
Things
guess,
change.
yeah.
Yeah. And what was really, popular at the time, like, we can't replicate what were the ingredients of the time because maybe the
Hmm.
cows were fed something different, like I went to Ireland, Northern Ireland, Belfast, and I had the butter. It's like I cannot believe this butter exists. I thought it would only existed in heaven. It was so good.
Hmm.
And then I started researching what the cows eat and things like that. And it stands head and shoulders. Like it was like, some people were smuggling, whatever. It's like I gotta smuggle this butter home. Because it's hard to get.
Yeah.
In Italy, the butter comes in tins. It's amazing. These
Why?
beautiful tins. Yeah, I love packaging. I'm a packaging
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
Yeah. I like to go into stores and go, "Why is it packaged like this?" And, can I mention a brand, no, a chain that I
You can
really love?
mention anything you want.
I love going to Starsky's.
Yeah.
They carry all sorts of butters from Poland, from Ukraine, from wherever, and I buy them all, and we taste test them. It's amazing. They have
Yeah.
tubes of sweetened condensed milk. Who sells sweetened condensed milk in tubes? It's genius because you only want to use a little bit instead of opening up a can and then having to, what do I do with the rest of this stuff? And I
Hmm.
just and there's smoked meats, of course. It's just a lot of fun. I always when I go to places like this, I always think I'm in Europe somewhere. Like I always transport myself for a little bit. It's like a mini vacation in my own country.
Well, even I remember even as a young kid because we had family in Rochester, New York, going over there and sometimes we go shopping to the Publix or whatever, right? And
Yeah,
you'd
yeah,
go and you'd stumble into like hot dogs that we didn't have here, or mustard that we didn't have here, or chocolate bars or potato chips, just basic stuff. And you went like, wow, why don't we have it here in Canada, right? Which of course that doesn't dawn on you at the time because we're 1/10 of the population and it couldn't compete, right? Because one
exactly.
share of any product in the United States means gazillion dollars, and a one share here means peanuts, right? But the great thing is that it's like when you go and you experience these different foods that you can't get here, and you think they're probably really good, and you convince yourself they are, and they may be really not, but it's just because you can't get them, and they're nicely
Yeah,
packaged, as you say,
yeah,
right?
exactly. You know what,
Yeah,
Ted? When I was growing up, it's weird to say we were poor, but we weren't poor. We just didn't have money. So my mom used to make food out of nothing. So there were days when we only had a few potatoes. My mom would carve out the potatoes into these little balls and fry them up. And then with the rest of the potatoes, she'd make this amazing mashed potato. And then she'd make these like little mounds and put the mashed potato, and then we'd put the balls of fried potatoes. And we thought we were eating like kings. It was like you had to sort of like the mother of invention was very, very strong in our kitchen. And
yeah.
we were at one point we were vegans because, we really couldn't afford even the cheeses and things, and we were like vegetarian. I mean, if we got some meat, it was dear. It was very, very dear. And
Yeah.
it stretched. And that's why I learned the value of flavors. That's why gardens were so important. I remember they used to make fun of the Italian garden, and then all of a sudden it dawned on people, like dandelions. People would freak out. You're eating weeds. No, we're eating health because there's so many nutrients in a dandelion. That's
Uh,
why, I'll give you an example. So at International Cheese, where they make the most mind-blowing ricotta, it's so fresh that when you pick it up, it's hot because the whey is still coming out. Well, their
mhm.
whey has the highest concentration of probiotics. You always have a lineup of senior citizens lining up, not for cheese or anything, but for a bucket of whey. They drink it all week. Their intestines are squeaky clean. They're so happy. But it's amazing how you can find something as natural as a natural probiotic. You would have to eat. It's like I will never buy eggs with omega 3 in them. You need to eat about 30 eggs with omega 3 in order to get the same amount you would get in one capsule or in a tiny little piece of fish, salmon. What are we feeding the chickens? What? We're feeding chickens fish,
And it's interesting that you mentioned that because I wanted to talk to you about that how confusing it can, and I've had this discussion with nutritionists and dietitians over the years, how confusing it's been over the years, if you pay attention to what people what are telling you, because for the longest period of time, eggs are bad for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't have eggs.
yeah,
Now it's like you can have eggs 7 days a week. Oh no,
exactly.
maybe you should cut that down to 2 days a week. Then it was like, okay, 2 drinks of alcohol a day, 2.5 maybe if you're a man. That's okay now. Now they're saying 2 drinks a week. Well, if you drink more than 2 drinks a week, then you have a drinking problem. Then basically everybody I know who drinks alcohol has a drinking problem, because anybody that I know who drinks alcohol does not drink less than 2 drinks in 1 week.
I think that the information changes so dramatically all the time, and it's like they're not going to tell you to throw your eggs out now. Eggs are expensive, and it all goes back to food waste. So it's like now they're being very cautious about things like that. And it's interesting what you're saying about alcohol. They want to put warning labels
Mm.
on like can you, it's people sometimes recognize that the history of wine, the label, like to be I'm being dead serious here. I'm not a drinker. I don't drink. If maybe I had some Jägermeister for my cough. It's an amazing drink because it's basically alcohol and herbs. Whoever invented this drink, honest to God, but I don't drink. But I love going into the LCBO to read the labels. Labels are so historical of where they came from, where this grape came from. Like I just think it's wonderful. It's a history lesson, and
Mhm.
I just think people need to see beyond that. And I think it's I understand people mean well, but to put warning labels on bottles of alcohol, it's like what are you guys smoking? Like
Yeah,
seriously,
well, yeah. The thing is, maybe it all boils down to the old moderation. Maybe that's just the
and
key to
even then,
everything.
you know, even then. So who knows what's going to be coming down the pike soon? So we're always trying to reinvent the wheel. Like, they used to say lard was really, really bad for you. Well, lard isn't bad for you.
Mm.
There's something about my mother used to say lard is very pure, Rita. For cooking, it binds the flavors. It's like French fries. The McDonald's French fries at one point were the greatest thing since sliced bread because they were fried in lard, beef lard. Beef lard
Mm.
absorbs the flavors and really transcended it. And then, of course, you can't use beef lard because there's a population and they're vegans and they're vegetarians, and that would be, that's a terrible thing to do to
Yeah,
someone. But still,
yeah.
the flavor is totally different.
Okay, so explain this to me. If you're a vegan, you're not allowed to eat honey. What exactly are we doing to the bees that we shouldn't be doing to them? What are we doing? Well, how is it that if you're a vegan you can't eat honey?
Is because it's an insect? I
But
heard
the
that.
insect, you're not killing the insect.
Yeah, I know.
You're
I
not even milking it.
I heard
Like
that there's vegan.
milking a cow
Now I've
is
heard
not a
there's
good.
vegan honey, which
Yes, there is. And what is that? What does that mean?
I don't know. I'll have to Google it because I'm fascinated by that. You know, well, what do you think of Beyond Meats and pretend meats and things like that?
You know what? I've cut down on my consumption of meats over the years. I still like meat,
Mhm.
but I think that there's a lot of other foods to choose from.
Yeah,
Fake meat, I have no interest in that, because if I want to eat meat, I'll eat meat. If I don't want to eat meat, then I won't eat meat. I'll eat fish, or I'll eat salad, or I'll eat poultry, whatever.
right.
I won't eat meat, but I don't need something to pretend that it's meat.
Yeah,
It's like dating a blow up doll.
that's very funny.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Then you look at the list of what's in some of these things, like
And it's worse than meat.
I know. And it's not. I think what's scary is people think, oh, it's low in fat. It's low in fat and calories. Oh no, 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 no.
Yeah,
So
I know.
I understand if you don't want to eat, and great because I'm not going to say I'm a vegetarian because I do have some poultry and some fish. Very very rare do I have red meat. But I can't call myself a vegetarian because I'll have an occasional meatball and
Yeah.
that'll slip on my plate. But
Yeah.
I mostly
Accidentally shows up under your
oh
pasta,
look,
right?
meatball.
Yeah. What
So,
happened there?
but
Let's talk about restaurants for a second here, because the pandemic was just brutal to
Hmm.
to that entire hospitality industry. It just terrible. You know, you open, close, open, close, open, close.
Yeah. Oh,
Whether they were right to say that or whether they were wrong, that's for another time, another discussion.
of course.
But what do you see for potential restaurateurs? If somebody's growing up right now and they think, you know what, I've always wanted to open a restaurant, what would you suggest to them? And how would you go about making sure that you're protected in some way?
If I was to tell someone you're interested in a restaurant, go work in a restaurant first. Go see
Yeah.
how brutal it is. It's so brutal. I've
Yeah.
seen pictures of chefs and line cooks, sitting on the floor, grabbing a bite to eat, bone tired to the point they're shaking. Their mornings, their days start early, early in the morning. They're out picking yeah, fresh fruits and vegetables at the food terminal, and then their whole day stretches out. And what bothers me, and I'll say this publicly, is you'll get these influencers and social media
Mhm.
experts. The real traditional ones, the good ones, they would never destroy a company because they weren't comped a free meal. And
Yeah.
I recall reading a girl who said she introduced herself, she had a great meal, the food was amazing, blah, blah, blah. And she was shocked that they had not comped her after she told them that she had a following of, I don't know, 10,000, whatever. So she
Yeah.
wrote terrible reviews, destroying their industry. Like,
Yeah.
you know how hard it is to run a restaurant? It's freaking hard. So if you're considering it, I would give it a second thought, a third thought. Sit yourself down, go work in a restaurant and see what it's like, you
And
know?
I would pay very, very little attention to what people write in when they write reviews because they do things like that because they think the service wasn't what it should be, and they say that the food sucks, and meanwhile the food was good.
Yeah,
Somebody was complaining online the other day because they didn't get free piece of birthday cake for their kid because they thought that the kid should have got some free dessert because it was its birthday. So they wrote like a 1-star review. So don't pay attention to these people and these influencers who claim they have 150,000 followers. Suddenly they do research and people do research on it and say, well, you got maybe about a quarter of that.
yeah,
And just because somebody puts a like beside your name on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on
whatever.
a tweet,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean anything.
No, no. And I think people who are interested in going into that industry have to be aware of all of this. I
Well,
would
somebody
always
has to go into that industry, otherwise you and I are not going out for dinner ever.
I always that's true, and there's so many different. Uh, you either have the high end, the Michelin stars, and I have my own thoughts about that. I don't really need. I personally, Canadian restaurants across Canada have always had Michelin quality. They don't need the stars to prove this.
Hmm.
I truly believe this
Yeah.
because I've eaten there and I've met the Jason Bangarter is one of probably Canada's top chefs. His vision is he's at Langdon Hall. The man is a visionary and he's so humble. His cookbook came out beautiful, and this guy is just so kind. And how he treats his staff, how he treats his ingredients. It's like it's his artwork. I ate at some Michelin stars in Europe and in the US, and I got to tell you, talk about disappointment. It's like,
Yeah.
really, really, what is all the hype about? So, I don't think we need the Michelins, to be honest with you. That's my personal opinion. Maybe the restaurants who have Michelins are saying I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Fine. We all are allowed an opinion.
Although to their credit, they make good tires.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole Michelin thing came from. You know that it was started by the
The
Michelin
Michelin
Tire Company.
Tire Company. And it was like the 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars. How many
Yeah,
more miles to get to this restaurant?
that's right. I
Yeah.
know it's bizarre. Very
Okay.
quickly, tell me this National Near Miss Day story because we talked about it before we started
Okay.
recording, and
So
and I
National
teased
Near Miss
everybody.
Day was a couple of weeks ago. And it was based on, and I think 34 years ago, a meteor came very, very, very close to plowing into the earth and blowing us into next Tuesday, basically. Like, hello, dinosaurs. And the world was not aware for 9 days. 9 days later, the scientists kind of came out and said, "Well, that was a close call."
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very close. And this meteor is supposed to come back. It's in about 500 years. I don't know. I don't have the notes in front of me, but we came really close to annihilation.
How did you stumble upon that? I'm curious.
I don't know. I'm always
Well, you're curious too.
I'm a curious person. I'm always saying, well, why is this color green and why is this color blue? And I'm going to tell you a very quick story. I went on a fam trip. You know, a fam trip is a travel assignment.
Yep.
And this was in the early 1994.
How old are
I
you,
was
lady?
about 2 hours old. And I went to U.S. Virgin Islands. And we went to a place, I won't tell you which island and where we were, but they took us to paradise. And it was this beautiful resort in the middle of the jungle with this incredible beach. And everything's so idyllic. And on this trip was this gentleman who was like this big lumbering pain in the ass. He asked stupid questions. That's what I thought. He would look at a bowl of cottage cheese and point to it and say, "Is that cottage cheese?" I got to the point where I would be behind him, mimicking him all the time to get people to laugh. But I learned the most valuable lesson from this man. This is way before cell phones. We had to rely on teletype and fax machines. So he was asking all these inordinate questions about this resort and why it was so isolated and blah, blah, blah. And the organizers were a little antsy, smoothing things over, blah, blah, blah. And then this guy came back. He says he was gone for a couple of hours. And he came back and he had faxes and he had faxed his company and this and that. He told us, he goes, "Were you aware that this was a scene of a massacre only 7 years ago? A group of prisoners escaped some prison. They came, they ambushed guests, they raped women, they tortured and brutalized and killed, I don't know how many, 7 people. They were all caught and they're on death row in Miami or wherever in Florida where they had I think it was in Florida. Anyways, that's why I kept asking all the questions. And then he turned to me very nicely and he says, "Never stop asking questions." I don't know what it was about him. He had a natural curiosity. And I thought, I will always have this natural curiosity. I will always be curious. I will ask questions politely, of course. I never would ask a grieving parent, "How does it feel to have lost your child?" or anything like
Yeah.
that. That's the most invasive, painful thing you can do to someone. But this guy did his research and his homework. And his question to the organizers is, "Why should we promote this resort? Can you assure us that it's safe?" And that
Yeah.
was an eye opener.
You bet.
Yep.
One last question. What's on tap? Anything specific?
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to maybe do my own podcast. I have
Mm-hmm.
some freelance assignments with Post Media, which is lovely.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get I used to have a website up, start it up again, and put all the fun things I used to do. Who knows? I'd love to do radio again. I love radio. I love that medium. It was a lot of fun, and it's interesting. I don't think we have a voice out there that covers life and food. Seriously, we are covering everything else, so who knows?
Yeah.
And of course, there's always stand up, right?
there's there's always stand up if you like suicide. Sure, why not? Whatever it is that you end up doing, and I'm sure there'll be a number of different things. It'll always be a pleasure reading and talking to you about them. And I thank you for taking the
Ted,
time
this
to
has
chat
been
with us.
such a pleasure and such an honor. You know how much I adore you. We've had so much fun in the past, and we will continue to have fun. That's for
We
sure.
will do so. We will do so without plant food. No, plant food's okay. Plants are okay. Fake meat.
I I saw
I'm gonna start making fake salad. How does that sound?
as long as
Gonna
you
make
don't have
it.
a bowl of bark, okay?
It looks like a Caesar salad, but it's made from meat.
Oh my. Anyways,
We'll
thanks
talk
so much,
soon.
Ted.
Take
Take
care.
good care. Ciao.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening. And we hope that you'll join us again next week. And if you get a chance, drop by our website, www.tedwoloshin, WOLOSHYN and there you will find a listing of all of our previous episodes. You can listen back to all of them. You can sign up and share your comments and thoughts with us. We would appreciate that. Also appreciate going online and check out the organ and tissue donation opportunities. You could change or even save a life. Have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin Podcast has been brought to you by ATP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices. It's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallachin Podcast is produced by Becky Coles. That's me. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. To talk to Ted and for more information on his podcast and our sponsors, go to www.tedwallachin.ca.